I'd like to welcome everybody here on this rainy day, but welcome. I'm glad that you're all here, and both from our Westbury campus and our Manhattan campus. If you're all wondering about my button, my red reflector button, we just got back from Milan, where our interior design school was in the Great Milan Fair for products and design, and everyone was so excited by our buttons, which have our website on the back. We distributed 10,200, and they're not all over the fair, they were all over Milan. In front of the people were walking around with NYIT. And so this has been a great success. Anyway, I know that in Old Westbury we've been giving buttons out to students, and any ones that are left over we will send to Manhattan. In any event, I want to thank you all for being here. And most of you know I'm the Dean, Judith DeMaio, of the School of Architecture and Design at NYIT. I thank our students for being here and our guests who join us from time to time or on a regular basis, and our faculty. But before we introduce our distinguished guests, and guests too, I'd like to make the following comments, which you already almost know by heart, and they are: remember to turn off your cell phones, which I have to remember to do. And as stated on our invitation, we are an AIA CES registered provider. So those of you who are registered architects, please sign your name on the form, and AIA members, please also put down your AIA number so we can get this to NY State so that you get your credit for this lecture. And I'm feeling that rather perfunctory because I usually have to say much more, but I'm leaving the honors to Professor Dockery. But in any event, I would also like to say, let you know this is the last of our spring lecture series for the year. The semester is fast coming to an end. I would like to thank Jennifer Mitchell, the School of Architecture and Design Special Events Coordinator. And of course, I'd love to, with great honor, thank Steel Case and Jeannie Beauchette, who is the development manager here, who's often has helped us get this wonderful space for our events. So Jeannie isn't here, but I want to thank you. Jennifer Mitchell is in the room somewhere. So on that note, I would like to ask Matt Dockery to please step forward and introduce our distinguished guests, and I thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean DeMaio. We're thrilled tonight to welcome Neil Denari to NYIT and Steelcase. Neil is former director of SCIARC from 1997 to 2001, currently professor of architecture at UCLA. Neil is principal of NMDA, Neil M. Denari Architects, Inc. He received a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Houston in 1980. His master's in architecture from the GSD at Harvard in 1982. In 2010, Neil was inducted into the Interior Design Hall of Fame, which should provide ample fodder for a conversation with the Dean later on. That is just one of a multitude of awards Neil has won, including, more recently, as far as I can tell, an unprecedented hat trick at the AIA LA Design Awards, where he took home 3 separate awards, Best in Show for the Next LA Design Awards categories, as well as the 2011 Gold Medal Presidential Honor for AIA in Los Angeles. Lastly, and closer to home, Neil received the 2012 AIA Merit Award for the project that you're going to hear a lot about tonight, HL23 down on the High Line, by the New York City chapter of the AIA. So he is killing it at the AIA on both coasts. Currently in Neil's studio, 2 commercial projects, both in Beverly Hills. Hopefully we'll see something about at least one. Speculative office building on Wilshire Avenue. The other is the 20th showroom, which is a furniture showroom, 6,000 square feet, Beverly Hills. Also, Central Station, Maine, Houston's new light rail, a proposal for a new light rail station in Houston, a city not necessarily known for its public transportation. Office and shopping complex in Yichang, China, 145,000 square meters of office and retail space in China. He lectures worldwide. He's a relentless educator and writer. He's author of Interrupted Projections, Gyroscopic Horizons, and I believe this year, Speculations on AADCU is a book which is coming out this year. So again, Neil, welcome to NYIT, and Steelcase, we're thrilled to have you. Also, we are honored tonight to have one of our own, Joseph Chiarelli. Joe and Neil, I think, are going to have a sort of tag team when they discuss HL23. A brief intro for Joe. Is a partner and operation manager at TG Nickel and Associates, Long Island-based construction management firm. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architectural Technology from NYIT, which he got in 1992. After NYIT, Joe went to work for Turner in Boston. He soon returned to the NYC area and was working in a leadership role in several high-profile projects for Turner, including the iconic U.S. Federal Courthouse in Iceland, where Joe was a critical player in the construction team. Upon completion of this landmark, Joe went on to become partner at Sullivan & Nickel, which in 2006 became TG Nickel. And since then, Joe has helped lead that firm to become a over $100 million per year in annual revenues construction company. And he's presided over the construction of several high-profile projects, none of which has a higher profile than HL23. So we're thrilled to have the architect and the CM, and how frequently those guys still talking to each other. So we are excited to have both of you guys here tonight.
What will happen is Neil will make a presentation and then a dialogue will ensue.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Judith and Matthew, and to NYIT, and to Steelcase, and to everybody for coming out in the rain. I really appreciate that. I'm going to rush through a number of projects from the office that we're doing in Los Angeles, and then Joe and I will get into a conversation about the design and the process of HL23.
Can everybody hear?
Can everybody hear? No? Is it not on? It's not on. Is it on? Now can you hear me?
Just raise it up.
I will pull it up and mic, okay? No
Let me
problem.
try raising it up for you.
I can do the mic.
No, but the point of having this high-end technology is so...
Can you hear me? No. I'm maybe the mic. Anyway, can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me in the back? I'll have to really scream. Is that better?
It's on now.
Okay, here we go. All right, we're good. Can we turn the lights down and just to get a little bit of contrast?
Yeah.
And it's a small image. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Students, you're in studio. Let's see. Okay. Is that? Can you hear me? Now you can't hear me. How about the mic? Huh? Let's take this. Now you can hear me. Well, all right.
Closer you get it.
Okay. Well, that one's stuck over there. T-shirt. Can you hear me? Is that better? I'm trying so hard. I'm not a really loud speaker. Can you hear me in the back? Just give me a wave. Okay. Students, you're in studio. You get a project. Do a fire station on the corner. Professor talks to you about ideas and so forth, and you go back and you go, I have a problem, I have a program, and the hard part probably is thinking of ideas. Where do ideas come from? If you're a modernist, they come from the program, and you do it the way in which the book tells you. Two types of problems I want to talk about really quick, just to be able to get into this whole thing, because Joe and I are really going to get into problems. Problems of how to construct a project. You know. Functional problem seems to need to be fixed. Go to the doctor, I need a remedy for something, cure my illness. My car is broken, take it to a mechanic, please fix my car, get it back to a kind of correct moment. Something functional, we need a solution. That's a kind of dry version of that. Disciplinary problems, things that need to be worked on, or obsessions, problems that don't have any end. And those are a lot of problems in architecture. Because once you get through solving the program, once you draw your diagram, I know as well as you do, the hard part. Well, I have to be able to click it. I do not want to do anything. You didn't pay to see this. You paid to see something else. Oh my God, I've got so much.
Before this has ever happened, it's still a case like this.
So, oh, you're going to take everything. There's this.
If you could, yeah, leave that one and just take the other one.
Sorry.
All right, can you hear me? We'll do it Vegas style. Okay. Things that need to be worked on, obsessions, ideas, problems that culture doesn't ask for, but you decide culture needs what you're working on. Mexico City, here's a problem: overcrowdedness, issues of sprawl, chaos, human issues. Certainly the world has a lot to think about in terms of our planet. Politicians, architects, scientists, we all have to come together to fix, at one level, some problems, but they're not like fixing cars. Socio-economic problems are not readily solvable. In that way, there are kinds of projects and problems that have a kind of a sense that there's a logic and a necessity, but culture is really asking us to think about solving these problems. I do a lot of urban studios at UCLA. We don't get a chance to do urban projects in our office, unfortunately. Here's an environment, Volkswagen factory in Germany. Think about it. We need to make a car. Here's the series of problems. We have a whole series of machines designed to be able to essentially take care of one element, and it's an incredible landscape. It's almost as crazy and complex as an urban environment. So this is technology deployed to be able to fix or solve for these issues. Frank Stella, you may know Frank Stella, a famous New York painter. In the mid-60s, he and a number of other painters decided to shape the canvas. And this is the era of canvas shaping. Why did they want to shape a canvas? Well, history of painting was always about the window, and whether it was even representational or abstract, canvases were usually rectangular at some level, as we know. So Frank Stella said, what is the way in which we can make progress in painting? Well, let's get rid of the rectangle of the canvas, get it out of the idea of a window, and make it an autonomous piece. Culture didn't ask Frank Stella, would you please shape the canvas? It was a problem of painting, and problems of painting have persisted. We don't really know if culture continues to ask painters to paint. I think painters wake up and they paint. Architects can wake up and do architecture. You don't need a client to do that, but there's also this idea of demand involved in architecture. Give me a problem, let me try and deal with it. I think there's a lot of shaping the canvas going on in architecture. And when you sit down and do your projects, you're shaping the canvas too, because you're inventing ideas that culture didn't ask for. Steve Jobs, you know Steve Jobs. How many read the book? A lot of people read the book, Reality Distortion Field, right? They walk in and go, Steve, should we do market research? He said, hell no. We don't need to know what people think they want. We need to do what we want. And then that's going to create what the world wants. Now that's a pretty strong kind of position. Architects can't be quite that visionary because we don't mass produce products. So he made the iPod, and we didn't really know that we wanted it. And for sure we didn't, well, I'm speaking from my point of view, I didn't know I needed the iPad until I got one, right? My wife said, we're going to go get an iPad. I said, over my dead body. Within a week, I wouldn't give it to anybody in the house. I suddenly realized, here's a world and here's a thing that I didn't know that I wanted. And that's the magic of Steve Jobs. He had the nerve to just make ideas. And this is really important because this is what we try to do in our office. At the same time, we're solving problems. And HL23 is a collision between what culture didn't ask for and what we as architects brought and what the market told us to do or what we resisted in that sense. So he created lifestyle electronics for unknown needs. He worked on both types of problems. He solved for a technical problem, and at the same time, he worked on ideas that were obsessive. He made technology empathic. Okay, I'm going to show you a series of projects. Curiously, they have a lot to do with modernism. We all have ideas about what modernism is in our world. First project is a house, and the first problem is how to make a house open yet private. Here's the profile of the family, well-to-do family, family of 4, 2 boys. The mom is a triathlete, cooks, does yoga. You know, it's almost like a crazy model family. The boys are into soccer, wrestling, robots, Gundams, and the dad is an entertainment manager. Neil, we like modern architecture. We really like it. We're from California, and we love light and sun and so forth. And, you know, of course, we know this case study 22, panoramic view, the icon, the glass house. But, you know, we don't want a glass house, okay? Don't give us a glass house. We actually want a house that has opacity, and it has a sense of weight, even though, you know, they understand the idea of life in California. So we had to think about the problem, and it was given by the client, how to make something opaque and enclosing and protective, not something you think about with California architecture, and very transparent at the same time. One note before I start, they said we want a 5,000 square foot house. Long story short, I talked them down to 2,600 feet, and that's a miracle in this world where, you know, money and hubris is very strong, especially in a place like California, to get down to a small footprint house. Made a lot of sense. Swimming pool, they do their laps. The green bit is actually like a little mini soccer field for them to play soccer. The dad is obsessed with golf. He chips his golf balls and so forth. So that's the roof plan. The project became a meditation on this small footprint house, 28 feet wide and 30 feet tall and 68 feet deep, and essentially how to carve out as much density and complexity in this house, but really focus on the idea of a window. A window in a surface rather than the idea of a curtain wall or something that's essentially about letting the landscape in. There's a great view over that wall. There's trees all around except in the back. It looks across a valley to the Getty Museum. Really, really beautiful. Facing east, this is the south facade, and you can already see that we're working essentially with a kind of a carved box mass. And the meditation is on how the windows work in frame views, let in light, both on top and in every kind of facade. Carport, very simple floor plan, goes into a kitchen with an open space for living and dining that does connect to a patio on the backside of the site. This drawing shows something of a kind of impression of what we were going for. Of course, the black here is the white plaster in the steel frame building. And you see the shape of the windows, and the windows in this kind of pockmarked surface are actually smaller than the surrounds of the of the project. So the impression visually is we want this to seem like the perforation or the aperture in the surface, while meanwhile it's much more limited. So essentially we're opening up the surface of the house, but we're not glazing this area. This is a perforated aluminum rain screen, and I'll show you what that looks like on the inside. These are all the windows unfolded. We go through a whole series of drawings to work with the subcontractor to build these windows. This is a view on the ground floor looking back to the entrance. There's the dad's golf course set up. Here's the accoutrements of life. We don't put any family images in these images, family pictures, people. We put their lifestyle, and we wanted to depict that very strongly. The section is the public space on the first 2 floors, and then it simply goes up into the 3rd floor with 3 bedrooms, 2 for the kids and 1 for the parents. And more details of the facade. This is a challenge on the level of structure and framing. There's a lot of steel in the walls. The walls are still relatively thin, as I'll show you, but most importantly, it's the relationship between these apertures, the geometry of the apertures. You can also notice that we're working with developable surfaces. We've only got partial conic surfaces. There's no 3-dimensional curving surface, so we can actually fold this stuff out. The main structure of these window surrounds is sheet steel in a wall section that we borrowed from Sana in work that they've done in Japan. Very, very thin walls. There's a view of the house. So the whole composition of the project, especially here, here's the little micro reference, to the glass house as it opens up to the swimming pool. But then the glass house morphs into essentially a window or a partial window that is itself very similar to the windows that make up the rest of the house. So we're really working hard linguistically in the idea of opacity, transparency, and orientation of view. That's the parents' bedroom looking out to the east across the canyon to the Getty. You see the bits of life, the map books, the flip-flops, the Gundams, everything floating in the swimming pool. This is what their life is like. Yes, it's a life of privilege, but at least we got them away from a huge 5,000 square foot house. It's really important that we made this smaller footprint project for them. And views around. This is the interior. That's a stair that goes up to the parents' bedroom. You can begin to see that even though the house is very much like a Japanese house, it's really squished. It's got hardly any void in it. There's a small void, a 2-story space out to the swimming pool. But the main thing about the interior, there's the middle floor, it's just a simple kind of public space, is that the morphology of the ceilings and the walls, creases in the ceiling that actually let in a kind of clerestory lighting. And you can see here for the first time that this house actually isn't thick walls, but it's a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get project. It's not poché, and you can see that really clearly here. So the windows become a kind of impression in the interior, an event, something that's very much bodily engaged. We had the volume to be able to do that, and essentially create this house as I think effectively, the idea of opacity and enclosure and shaped windows, which are very specifically oriented toward views and letting light in to the house. We even designed a little storage unit mimicking the house for all of the keys and stuff that you usually lose, that sits on the counter in the kitchen. And the floor plan is very Japanese in this sort of sense of economy. It's just simply packing the 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms up with 2 voids, small voids, towards individual stairs that go up into each end of the house. And there's a view sort of on the center line looking back to the stair down to the 2nd floor, and that's the master bedroom on the right. Problem number 2, modernism, how to deal with the request for timelessness. Every client, in one form or another, always asks me at some point in the process, how am I going to feel about your project, about our project, in 10 years? It's a curious question. And the question comes out of a little bit of fear, and the fear is, we're commissioning you, and this needs to be a really interesting project, but I also understand something about style. And styles, of course, go in and out of fashion, and if you do something and it has style, well, how am I going to feel about it? Because everything that I can go through in my sort of personal life, whether it's a car or clothes or books, I can expend them. And I can't really expend this project. I'm buying into it. So the sense of forever, in a funny way, it's a wrenching moment. And so when you think about forever, or if you think about style, there's always a sense sometimes I need something that will remain interesting to me forever. And what is an architect to say to that? And I'm confronted with that all the time. And all I can say is the more I love designing a project, the more I think you'll love being, in this space. I can't guarantee how you're going to feel. It's an absurd question, but it's one that we're confronted with from time to time. And we were confronted at the beginning of this project that I'm showing you. This is the office building that Matthew talked about. This is on a site in Beverly Hills, busy site. Iconic street. We have a client who wants to do something incredibly compelling, they said, and very much in a realm of quality. What's curious, and I'm being sort of open book about this, we just finished HL23, a steel and metal and glass project, and I said to myself and to the team, I want to do a concrete building. I'm always interested in trying to kind of learn, and pouring concrete in a place like LA is a pretty compelling idea, a place that's mostly built out of balloon frame and stucco. So we presented this project. It's shaped by the forces of the site largely because of setbacks, because of conditions of FAR, conditions of the entrance to the parking garage below, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what we presented, and I was very emphatic about the building being fairly straightforward, fairly brutal in a way, flush glazing, kind of a European project, smooth, Ondo-like concrete and so forth. Here you see the cantilever in the back. And we refined it a little bit as well. Even before we presented the scheme to them, we took out the punched windows, and we were rejected. We were flatly rejected in a nice way. It's too heavy, not light enough. Modernism is about lightness. I said, but we're levitating the no. Concrete is a sign for heaviness. We talked about brutalism, we talked about Corbusier and so forth. He said, no, we want the effete steel version of Le Corbusier. We don't want the blunt, primitive, heavy version of Le Corbusier, even though they, of course, historically fall into a world of modernism. So we had to turn our attention to office building language that was very, very straightforward. Inland Steel building in Chicago, that's SOM 1957. You know this building? Pepsi Cola building at 59th and Park, 1960 SOM. Beautiful project, one structural column bay, equal cantilevers on all four sides, beautiful project. Straightforward kind of aluminum and stainless steel skin with the thinnest mullions and nice big pieces of glass. Showed this to them and they said, this is what we like. This is what we want. So it began to confirm this issue of the nature of the timeless. And when you look at that, there's the apotheosis of modernism in the sense that all this is a material rendition of the program. X number of floor plate, make the mullions as thin as possible, have glass which is uninflected, and that's about all you need to the project. So minimalism becomes a kind of high art form. Now we had to look to Mies if we were going to follow this pathway, and obviously to Seagram, where it was, clear, and we pointed this out to our clients, the decorative nature of Mies's work. The kind of less is more project, sneaky in its moreness. If it was truly less is more, we wouldn't obviously have the decorative grain, the verticality of the building. And even though it's a kind of minimal piece of graph paper, the sense that Mies was working on a problem and an obsession, essentially steel, but that it wavered between structural steel and repeating structural steel shapes that were decorative, you've got to believe that Mies was working on the two types of problems at once. The problem of the imaginary and the problem of the obsession, and also the problem of, here's a program, give me this much floor plate, get out of the way and just build it the way it should be. Beautiful project, beautiful. This is a little known or lesser known building for Cardi in Mexico City, also amazing. I love the white soffit. So we took the concrete building, we said, okay, let's just put the glass on it and try that. It was a joke. We sent it back to them and they said, we like the glass more, but the angled walls are a problem. Not timeless. Not timeless. Assigning value to the non-Cartesian of the lack of timelessness. A friend of mine said, even you, Neil, you have to face somebody arbitrating something so finely, like you can't just sort of do what you want and, everybody goes, that's great. Really fascinating, sort of moment. So we get down to this, and it was at this moment in stripping the project down to this point of kind of Miesian clarity, they said, aha, we get it. There's not anything inflected in the project, so we're going to have to pursue the way in which we can make a project that leverages itself between the nature of the timeless and something that's contemporary. So these big glass mega panels, using technology that we learned on HL23, we propose a frame of black painted steel to at least essentially begin to make the project more graphic and more irregular and not so much about the spandrel. We took another approach in this scheme, which was to deboss or push back the spandrel, push out the ribbon of glass. And by the way, they demanded a 10-foot band of glass. No louvers, no fins, no nothing. Off limits. It's really, really hardcore. And I found perverse pleasure in that because this was a little bit of somebody making a militant statement about design for which we needed to kind of find our ways into the project. We begin to fold the spandrels as you see here and also add some of the things we were doing with the mega panels, and here's the project. So I'll leave it to you. Is this a project for which we add a small trope to the canonical form of modernism? This is going to be black stainless steel. It's going to be beautifully detailed. And you can see that we're borrowing a little bit of Rudolphian, Paul Rudolph, in the kind of modularity of the floors because of the kind of creases and pinches within the kind of stacking of the floors. It's really, in this lecture, which is conversational, for me, I think we're very proud of this project because it's not one that seems obviously in the realm of spectacle that a lot of people would talk about, HL23, the crazy project, the defiant project. Here we were disciplined by not ourselves, but the demands of the client, and to do it in a way in which we weren't, let's say, negatively affected by the limited scope. We talked quite a bit about the profile of the building in the end. This will start construction in about half a year. We're doing automated parking below as well, which is a nice thing. Modernism part 3, basically, the pop graphic abstraction problem. Client for a furniture showroom to go into the client request. He is interested in graphic design and photography and once practiced it and now is a reseller of mid-century modern work. And we had to look at the way in which graphic design, and this is Paco Rabanne, a 1960s fashion designer, treated the nature of construction in fashion. You know, this looks like contemporary architectural facade making, you know, today. And if you extrapolate across all these disciplines, there's a lot of things to learn. So we had to work with his interest in modernism. He sells Zaha Hadid on the one hand next to Eames. And as you know, Eames was always treated as good design and Zaha is sort of flamboyant. Zaha works on imaginary obsessions. Eames fixed and solved problems. And I wish I had a picture of the lounge chair, but you know when you bend plywood, you know the bent plywood stuff? Plywood doesn't want to be bent. He had an obsession, he and Rames, to bend plywood. So again, it was another moment where even architects who claim, I'm just working to solve the problem of type 1, I'm not guilty of any obsession or the imaginary. We're all, and I would say not guilty, we're working on it because it's part of it. Here are some images. This is a bronze aluminum skin, three-dimensional kind of piece, certainly reminiscent of the Paco Rabanne fashion. So here our project is how to not make it be retro and loaded with a certain type of association, but have the kinds of references that our client was interested in his case, in POC fashion from the 1960s. So we didn't do anything with gradient. We didn't try to mess around with it. We were really straight and very hardcore, I think, about the way in which the pattern works. These fins are Z-shaped and they kind of are cantilevering vertically. They're 3/16 inch, very robust, thick anodized aluminum. It's a big single space on the inside. How to make a happy building in a desperate climate. We're off modernism, but we're still dealing with the contingencies of clients. We were invited as one of 4 teams to do a master plan for housing for 45,000 middle-class people in Russia, 20 kilometers south of St. Petersburg on a lunar site. It literally almost looks exactly like that site. I'm not going to show you the housing project, but I'm going to show you this kindergarten. As part of the program, we were asked to design one of 7 schools. There were 4 kindergartens, a high school, middle school, elementary school. And so we wanted to play out certain obsessions we had, both formally and materially. This is a single-story building, like most kindergartens. It houses about 110 kids, 3, 4, 5 years old. And what we were desperately attempting to do was to essentially make a project that rejected, on the one hand, the nature of isolation in this very, very dark and snowy and dreary kind of climate. So we looked to quadruple glazed big pieces of glass. We looked to the way in which courtyards could be used in all climates. I'll show you the plan. It literally is a series of bays of colored carpet with dunes and topography inside, as well as a number of classrooms and so forth with the 2 courtyards in the middle. I'm going to show you a series of interior renderings. Again, this is the world of children, but it's only the stuff that they play with, the books, the blocks, the airplanes, the cushions, the chairs, and so forth. As we were trying to play out an obsession that we have with objects in space. Here we're looking through this project. So the sense of color, the way in which the structure works in this kind of cast-in-place world where the columns obviously morph into the horizontality of the ceiling dominated by the pattern of the lights, and very large pieces of glass. You can see a moment where we have an odd piece of glass that's going to actually get filled up with snow. There's heating coils that we proposed on the concrete to drain that out into a cistern. Here's one of the courtyards filled with 4 feet of snow. It's actually miraculously a sunny winter day. So the students can go outside and play and then go back into these hyper-colored corridors. And you can see in this particular image, our obsession with the problem of the window continues. We designed this in the same era as the house, and we're looking obviously to the way in which color and the graphic of the frame play out in many ways the same as the house. We're trying to produce a relationship between opacity, perforation, aperture, and almost a Californian openness. This is the that's the dining hall, and these are some of the individual classrooms. In terms of the images, you can see our obsession with making sure that everything is in there. I wouldn't say that these images are photorealistic. I'm not tricking you that this isn't a built project, but the way in which even the texture of the whiteboard on the left side of the room is articulated is very important for us. And the views here. Very quickly, last one. How to use amateurism against professionalism. I'm really in favor of the amateur and not the professional. The amateur is the one who constantly says, I do it for the love of design, which is really a definition of the amateur. The professional is somebody who gets paid for services. We treat our work as really about the love of design, but in this case, it's even beyond love. We won a competition with a team in Tokyo to design the interior and exterior of a new airline in Tokyo, well, based in Kansai. You know as well as I do, there's a history to the livery and graphic design of airplanes, and there are styles and there are techniques and so forth. And one here is graphic design that makes the plane look longer and smoother and faster, just like stripes on a car, accentuating speed. That world gave way in the low-cost airline world to kind of big graphics, almost like the airplane is like a flying Walmart or a flying Target, something that's not about elegance, but mostly about immediacy and vitality. Lion Air is one, Jetstar is another one, big typography and so forth. So this was our world that we had to work within. We did designs for 50 different names out of 700 names that were proposed, things like Sail, Light Airways. We did all the rendering on these. Flying Cloud, funny names, funny typography, Neighbor, etc. So finally, oddly enough, Peach was chosen. It was the most unlikely name, and that's the rendering, and the interesting thing, that's the real thing. And the difference between the rendering here, you know, what's cool about this is we're only designing paint. So when they build the project, quote unquote, it's going to look exactly like the rendering because it's only paint, and it's painted in a factory. So this is our first project that's like exactly like the rendering. It's really cool. Okay. Precise form for an imprecise world. We're going to have a conversation together with Joe about HL23. This is the High Line. Everybody's been up on the High Line top to bottom, I'm sure. This is looking south. Our project is lurking in the north 2/3 of the site. Don't have to give you the background on the project of the High Line. I'll just give you a quick background on our project. This is the High Line in 2005. Our site is right here. We were doing some studies for galleries underneath the High Line for the client, Alf Neyman. In March 2005, he said, I have a site. You won't believe it. It's a real challenge. Would you like to take on the project? We went through and essentially started a design project that ultimately took 7 years to complete. There's the zoning on the left for the West Chelsea zoning. This was a 15-foot setback all along the High Line. No structure could get into it. This is, you know, Gansevoort was different. The standard was different. The West Chelsea world is different. So we had 25 feet out of a 40-foot wide site. Our client said, I need to build a building bigger and taller than what the site will allow. The building is too small otherwise. It wasn't an issue of FAR or floor area because there was already excess floor area that was available. It was literally about how to deal with the zoning. So our question was how high, how wide, what would it be, how would we approach the project? This is just one diagram. Ultimately, we asked for 8 waivers to city planning. We were granted 7. One waiver was almost like a kind of straw man waiver. And you can see the hatched area on the far left 45% of the floor plate, the sellable floor plate of the building, is beyond the zoning. And so what we had to do for a year was to convince city planning that the architects weren't egregious, the developer wasn't greedy, and that a project of this type needed to be eccentric and restive and problematic rather than conforming. Okay, I want to just kind of talk about the organization of the team, and then Joe and I are going to, I think, essentially have a kind of back and forth conversation about the construction process. In 2007, we sent a group, Yoichiro, where's Stefano? I just want to acknowledge the team. Rick Michaud? No. They were compelling members. Stefano ran the project from 2007, and we couldn't have done the project without him, and Yoichiro joined after graduating from Columbia. So a public thank you again always to you guys. And we began in 2006 at the end of the year with TG Nickel. We were working with Bovis before. We couldn't quite pull it together, and fortunately Joe and his team came into our orbit and things clicked right away to pursue this complex project. I flew out once a month for 3 days, made more than 50 trips to New York from California, and worked closely with the team. We were the stewards of the 3D model. Like all architects now, you have to sign documents that hold you responsible to that. All of these things coordinated with fabricators, consultants and subcontractors, and of course ultimately to the general contractor and the CM. I'm just wondering, Joe, if you want to kind of talk about entering the project and let's say how you guys began to approach it.
Sure. We hear me? Does everybody hear me?
Uh-oh, here,
Now?
easy.
Okay. Hold that conversation, all right?
We'll just pass it
forward. Okay. We had been brought on in early 2007, as Neil had mentioned. Bovis was our predecessor on the project, and really, like every project, and I'm sure as you all struggle every day with, oh, it's too expensive. So that was really how we had gotten introduced to the project, and really, the main, I think the key component to bring us on to the project is, as was mentioned before, myself and my partners, 4 members, we were with Turner Construction, and we had all worked together on the Richard Wire Federal Courthouse. Complex curtain wall, very detailed custom curtain wall with multiple contractors. At that time, that project, Turner was involved in the purchasing of it as well, and it was a real dogfight between Turner and Bovis, and really the way Turner got that project, we wound up about $10 million under Bovis because we broke up the contracts. We broke up the curtain wall package. At the time, it was a $55 million project. We broke it up amongst 7 contractors. So that was the vision that the developer here brought, and we were able to convince them that we could do the same on this project.
I think I'm going to just spend a few minutes kind of talking about the conceptual approach that we took, and then we'll get a little bit more into the issue of construction. The site obviously catalyzed a lot about the project, and one of the main things that we saw that was just completely lucky for us, of course, was the High Line. We were going to do a building on a park that wasn't Central Park or another classic park. It was this new park. And not only was it a park, but instead of it being a square, it was a line. So doing a park as a line and a building on a line was really powerful to us. And what we also knew and could predict was the popularity and the power of this site. But we were going to have a built-in audience every day. Built-in audience. Everybody was going to come and see our building whether they knew it or not, right? Everybody goes up there. Second biggest tourist attraction in New York. I don't know, HL23 is there, what's the funny building? I went to see this building, so it was essentially a kind of byproduct of the power of the site. And I just start out with the kind of 2 images. These are recent photographs. The profile of the building and how it sort of leans out over the park. The particularities of the facades and the way in which the structure is reiterated with a ceramic frit which we'll get more into. The building is a building about the meditation between the two-dimensional and the facade, for which from blocks and blocks you see this building frontally, and then when you move past it, it rotates and becomes a super dynamic 3D thing. So we had a lot of optical things going on in the project. Simple floor plan. We got a core that's biased on the west side of the site, hooked together with a scissor stair, and it's kind of a leftover space, shall we say, for the lease space and a very micro lobby, very efficient lobby. There's an image of the lobby. That's a desk designed by Stefano, and that's Stefano there walking up to greet Sam in the lobby. That's carved out of one piece of stone in Italy. Maybe you guys want to talk about that.
Well, just I was going to mention that that is, like Neil said, one piece of stone carved out, and you can imagine how heavy it is. It is solid. It's not cored out, and just the dynamics of engineering it to not only be delivered in one piece and not get chipped or damaged, but also stand like that.
It's sitting on 3 steel tubes, like
Yep.
sleeves, just on its own gravity. This is the 7th floor plan, and you can see there's public space on the south, private space on the north, and a more opaque surface with inner kind of bedrooms. And that was really required by the client. Full curtain wall on the north and south for views made a lot of sense. We knew that we were going to have to deal with glazing. That was going to be, high tech to be able to deal with energy control issues. You can also see the splitting of the east facade, which is an important element in the project formally as well. I'll just show a few images. Obviously looking to the west on 23rd Street and the shimmering quality of the 3-dimensional stainless steel panels, of which Joe and I have intimate knowledge of their production, and some images showing the building as you come up in the stair at 23rd Street. Another moment where we really feel deeply connected to the infrastructure of this park. There's another view of that stair. So the luck of the site and the way in which the building essentially is experienced and interfaced at this particular level, 25 feet in the air, where if you're walking on the street, you're typically seeing storefronts and signage and so forth. And here you see pure geometry and pure materiality, really, I think, at its best. The building is standing out and fitting in. Sometimes it's just a background and people don't see it or care or notice. On the other hand, there have been a lot of photographs taken of this building as well. Here it is also in context. I'll show a few pictures of the interiors. Every floor is a single apartment. There's a duplex on the top and on the bottom. But each floor, they're like snowflakes. They're similar but different because of the way in which the walls move back and forth. And also the structure and the frame moves through multiple floors differently. And you can clearly here see the relationship between the 8-inch intumescent steel painted steel and the frit. And other framed views. These are all on different floors with different ways in which it captures light. This is on the 12th floor. The family that lives up there, they love sitting in the corner and just looking out with their grandchildren. Other views, panoramas. This is the 13th.
I'm sorry, but I'm sure you can all see it and appreciate it, the geometry and how the frit on the glass and the steel on the interior. Look at the lines. I mean, every picture that you see, how parallel the lines are, and the 3D modeling, and so many references. We can go on all night about it. The 3D modeling helped so much in the construction, the engineering of it, and the construction of it, and that's one really nice element of it.
Yep. Nice juxtaposition with the super busy car wash. This is a bedroom on the north side. Master bathroom, quite beautiful. And also to the south with the light coming in. Of course, there are Mecco shades that come down. You can deal with the sun and also privacy. Okay, so I think we're going to get into more detailed process of construction, and I'm showing these renderings of the steel frame, but basically, and Joe can kind of talk about the kind of relationship between the structural engineer, us, and the steel fabricator in their office, and how this, before it had gone to site, was getting coordinated.
So, as often happens to you professionally, or what will happen to you when you get out into the world of students, one of my favorite stories early on in the construction, and this is another great facet about the developer, getting the construction manager onto the team in pre-construction. So we were involved very early on in construction. Documents at the time were probably 50–60%. And we go into a standard pre-construction meeting. The architect, Stefano, and curtain wall engineer, structural engineer, comes in, and he was a pretty pale guy to begin with, but that morning he comes in and he says, well, I just want to let you guys know, no pre-warning, that we've done some early calculations, and the building, as you can see, you don't have to be a scientist, the building wants to lean over 2 inches over the high line, both in the south and west directions. No matter what steel plates we can put in the building for the shear wall, it's going to be into the curtain wall. And the curtain wall already was being engineered, again, from a budget point of view, as I mentioned before, and also from a design edge point of view. The wall panels were procured from China, mainly because there's no company in the U.S. that would take on such a challenging project and such challenging wall panels. Other panels were being procured from other parts of the world, and now we had to deal with a structure that would be leaning into the curtain wall.
This is an elevation of the framing. The building does obviously cantilever subtly, but it cantilevers in 2 directions, so the building wants to sort of fall to the east and twist. So we did a preliminary framing for DeSimone, and we wanted the diagonals to pass through 3 floors rather than chevron per floor to make the building appear taller. So we were already working on kind of visual effects in a way. And of course, we got this detailed model back from the fabricator, and we're making notes and things like that. So show this image of marking up things. There's still the idea of the eye and the hand going into a critique of what otherwise is digital. And here's an image of our compiled model where you see every element in the project, basically, in terms of the envelope, et cetera, et cetera. So this was our working point, basically, between everyone.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the 3D model became so important because basically we were able to look on with the architect, the engineer, and designers, what conflicts we were going to see going up the building before we actually came upon that problem in the field. And it worked flawlessly. We were able to hit every conflict in engineering and design the steel where we needed to, design it to tuck it in, to make sure that there wouldn't be any conflicts. And one interesting thing, something I never did before, we actually had to hire on a separate engineer during the process to vertically cantilever the steel, to camber the steel, I'm sorry. You've all heard of cambering, and it's usually on horizontal. We vertically cambered the steel so that the building would go back to a 0 resting position.
This slide's for you. Encountering the dewatering of the site and the bathtub.
Well, actually, another, and again, there are different challenges for every project, but we're actually stopped for almost 6 months, and when we got back into the project, there was a neighboring building, right? The, no offense, but I guess I'll say it wasn't anything like a Highline 23 project. Had a hard time selling it because it wasn't that level of a project, and was going to do everything he could to stop the development of this project, because the last thing he wanted to do for sales was have a construction project next to him. So after we got back and going, we literally found a stream going through the project. We had to do soil retention all along the east elevation of his property, and we found old
seashells. I mean, the whole area over there is incredible wildlife that we found. So this picture here is just showing you the watering, soil retention, and the waterproofing along that elevation.
Getting a building out of the ground, wouldn't you say, is the hardest part of a project? Just launching it out of the earth.
That's it. It's once you get past that's the unknown. Everything outside and up is easy.
So the construction sequence was as much prefabrication as possible as truck and the site would allow. But again, I'll make a Tokyo reference. This is a very small site. You see this crawler crane, not a tower crane. It's parked on the west side of the High Line. Trucks pulled up with the steel, and I think there was not a single piece of steel that got sent back. Everything fit together like a kit of parts.
And I mean, look at that section of the shear wall. That was on 3 sides to help stop that want to cantilever.
Just one image, but the project was built in 2 phases. The first 7 floors with concrete poured into the decks every other floor. They had a cure for 21 days, so that the lower part of the building was going to be as close as possible to where the steel was supposed to be, because if we were going to get out of whack high up, that Joe alluded to, we were going to be a problem. So it was literally like building 2 separate buildings. The first 7 stories, and then the last 7, because the concrete in the deck finalizes the structure. And do you want to talk about the guy cabling going on in the structure?
Sure. Similar, and make a reference also to those of you who know the federal courthouse. When we had a similar problem out there with the rotunda, where there was an engineering, couple of items where we lost tolerance in the curtain wall. We basically had to guide it in by hand, by eye. Here, we actually had, again, benefit of 3D modeling 10 years later in technology. As Neil mentioned, we actually sectioned the building up 4th floor, 7th floor, and up, and basically had to do a precise survey every step of the way. So the amount of guide cabling, as you can see in this picture frame, again, everything pulling back to the west side of the building.
This is where the cambering was going on. These types of columns, which you typically camber a beam so that when it's loaded, it gets back to horizontal. But these were pre-stressed basically, so that the building would when it was finally loaded, would quote pop into place. Here's a section of the south facade, and the one thing to show is there's no spandrel glass in the project. The glass panel goes from floor to floor, and you'll see how that works. But we've got almost like a redundant structure. The darker tubes are part of the prefabricated glass system, and then the steel frame you see behind of the frame.
Yeah, do me a favor, just go back to that
Yeah.
again, because I want to point something out as well. Something my partner always teases about. It's a steel building without any steel in it. One of the design things that actually came from Denari's office was we can't have that beam in the living room. So as you see, there's no beam right there. There was a beam in the original design. That couldn't interrupt that ceiling. So they took the beam out. What do? Well, we have to shore, much like a concrete job. So this is regular steel and deck job, poured concrete floors. We had to, in the living room area, all the way up, basically reshore the job, make sure that we get that steel beam out, and here we are.
These are images of the factory in mainland China. Our team went, I think, a dozen times in terms of man trips, and Nichols' office and team also did. And you can see the way in which it's produced. And here's the precise and imprecise and the handmade and the digital. I mean, these are all welded steel frames. So of course we give them exact geometry. That's an extruded piece of steel, but in a factory, a guy is flame cutting a piece of steel, putting it on a jig and welding it by hand, just like anybody in a kind of craftsman office. And the glass was also so big that they didn't have an autoclave to put it in, so these units had to be essentially laminated and sandwiched together by hand as well. So we stressed out their capabilities, which is why we went over so often to sort of check on the quality and the craft, because we were pushing it. And this is the first, this is not a mock-up, this is the first what we call a glass mega panel, and there were a whole series of them, of course, in this atlas of panels that glazed the project. And I'll just point out, here's what's called a spreader beam, and this beam essentially allows the verticals to be welded to it so that we can make very small joints, because there's no movement possible between the pieces of glass, no racking. So the joints can be very, very small. So not only do we get the benefit of prefabrication, we get the benefit of very thin profile joints. And all of the steel from the frame is wrapped in bead blasted stainless steel, so it's quite an elegant piece. And here they are attaching it to a frame, and then these pieces have to go into the open shipping container and shipped, and they ultimately went to Long Island before they went back into the city. You went to China.
Yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah. I liken it to like an Italian sports car. There's a factory. You can see them being made, you know, sort of like a factory, but really they're all handmade in the end. So this relationship between digital fabrication and the artisanal nature of construction was really part of it. And now we're going to talk about the stainless steel panels. That was a real curious set of problems and pleasures to work on. This is a photograph from London Terrace across the street. We built a number of mock-ups. This is in the shop at UCLA where I'm a professor. We built this with students one summer. And here are the dies that were first made and milled. Took a lot of days to mill this, and these were even before they were polished. And this is the first panel that came out, and we had some problems with what went on. Do you want to talk about the springback problem and with the dies, and we had to remill the dies?
I don't, why don't you speak to that?
Okay. We, this was really the first correct panel, but these dies, just on a kind of anecdote, we gave them digital geometry, they milled them. It took something on the order of 30 days on a mill to mill all the pieces for the 3 panels. We put them together, we made the first panel, and the shape memory of the stainless steel happened where the form wouldn't take all the way. So we had to go back and actually re-mill the profile of the shape of the panel, but we didn't have a new model to give them, and we went down and we guessed how much we should take off, literally like a haircut, to be able to make the panels snap into place. So you've heard this story of trying to take into consideration movement and the way in which materiality works. So we went from giving them a digital model to going down there and scratching our heads going, maybe 5 millimeters, maybe 6 millimeters, hardly a digital moment, very much a kind of moment of guesswork. And there's Mr. Chiarelli right there, and Dante and Martinez. Maybe you want to take it from there.
Yeah, there were several renditions, and I didn't want to speak to the design aspects of what was right and what was wrong, but the quality control we knew was going to be an issue. It was
Sorry, this is in Buenos Aires. Yes, in the factory in Buenos Aires.
Right. So we knew we were dealing with a small international artistic company. Again, budget reasons. The developer, I forgot who found them. Do you remember?
Front.
It was the front. Okay. So the exterior wall consultant knew of this company, and we saw that there was going to be a serious issue. And one thing, and I just want to digress a little bit. I guess probably a lot of factors. Growing up in a household with off-the-boat Italians, the guilt, going to a design school and having an appreciation for the architecture, and then the pride in doing the project and coming off that again, I referenced the courthouse. Something that I learned at an early age in my career, that appreciation that kids and adults from all over the world would come and see this thing. And I knew personally that I wasn't going to let Neil and his team down, and we said however many visits it takes, that's what we're going to do and make sure that this is right. And I don't know if you want to talk also about the consistency of the bead blasting, but it literally got down to, they were so small and this was such a handmade project for them. Everything that they did was handmade. That it came down to, and I forgot, I think he had a death in his family or something. The one guy who was in a small room, we went down there, literally a room that was not even 10 by 10, and it was that technician that did the bead blasting. And Dante said he'll get it right, and he got it right, and he was away, and somebody else did it, and it was like, wait, that's not right. We need that other guy back. I mean, when you think about a building, an iconic building now in New York City, that level of hand detailing. And we went down there, and this is a mock-up that we set up just because we knew with the jointing that was going to be so viewed, that elevation was going to be so viewed by everybody that came, both New Yorkers and anybody around the world. We knew that we had to make those joints precise and had to be right, and whatever it was going to take to do it, that's what we did.
But this, I think you misspoke. This was not the mock-up, but the panels themselves.
Well, this was, we mocked that up.
Yeah.
This was an actual panel that we called it dry mocked up. These are the actual panels that were going on the building, and then Neil and I went down there and he took the lead in saying, not that one, or we need to do a little bit more work with the jointing. Remember adding some struts in as well, before they were going to be shipped to New York.
It was like going down with a white glove test and literally sort of walking around and having the privilege of saying that's a little bit off. And as Joe said, there was one man, one guy, not 5, no machines, with a bead blasting, which is a hose over a shoulder, sort of moving around like that, putting each panel in a room. So this is the unknown aspect of how a building like this is very much handmade. It's not, really no robots touch this building. So here are the other dry fit pieces, all mocked up, and we went down and we looked at everything so that as long as the frame of the building and the backup system were going to come together, then we could be assured that it would have this kind of precision. This is an image out on Long Island at Island International Fabricators. They produced the backup system that the Buenos Aires team applied the panels to, and then these were put on the truck and brought out. And here's one of the panels being lifted into place. By the time we got the cladding going, the building came together pretty quickly.
And again, the same level of quality control, and I'd like to say same passion went into making sure that at least once we got those panels here in the States, now we're out in Calverton fabricating these panels, and again, it was a series of meetings out there, and this isn't right, and that's not quite right. You really had to take, I tell students all the time, at least I can't speak for architecture, but in construction, should have had a degree in psychology, because it was a matter of how do you get the workmen now in that frame of mind. They've got a high state of pride, but how do you get these guys to fabricate this thing and understand what the quality needs to be and the impact? And one of the things that we really had, and I tried making happen, and it did happen, is took on a young guy, aggressive guy, a proud guy who is one of the sub-foremen out in Island's shop in Island. You could just see the smile on his face, and he came out into the field, and it was really a big component of how the erection of the wall panels and the setting of those wall panels went. Because here's a guy that took it from all those raw materials, put the components together, and then managed the installation as well.
So between the steel and the glass and the metal panel of the building, essentially kind of comes together in this final form. Some views of the interior. This is on the 4th floor. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll have time for some questions. Are there any questions for our guests? Yes.
What was your inspiration for those buildings?
Hello.
Hi.
Just wanted to find out, what was your inspiration for the building?
I would say that, quite honestly, there's not really a specific inspiration. How should I answer it? On the one hand, I have a kind of a blunt answer, like 25 years of hard work is the inspiration, meaning there's a lot of ideas in this building that emerged in the 90s, ideas that are formal on the one hand about surfaces and so forth. So there wasn't really a flash of inspiration or an aha, kind of moment. If anything was inspiring, it wasn't a metaphor or anything, it was the site. The site pushed the project into its capacity as this kind of unconventional thing, a small footprint, big at the top. So the conditions, designed it. I like to say we found it and we didn't really force, the issue, but so it was a combination of finding conditions at the site, which were very inspiring, as well as, a lot of work that, went into it as a precursor to the way in which geometry would work and things they were interested in with how glass would work and so forth. So I hope that answer it's an honest answer. It wasn't a flash or anything like that.
More questions, please? Yes. Can someone get you a mic or microphone? We can't hear you. Just a minute, please.
What was the decision-making process when we were choosing the manufacturers for the building in Chelsea? As you know, everything started with a lot of fabrication, but then ended up being hold a lot of artisanal and man-made power and knowledge and skill that finished the building. How do you choose manufacturers? What was the reason to choose exactly those manufacturers?
Well, in a number of cases, there were, let's say, economic conditions. For instance, the companies that were capable of doing the glass that we knew of, there were 3 companies and they're basically all in Germany. And we did talk to them, I believe this was even maybe early on and before you guys were involved. And of course it was in 2005 and 6 with a hot economy, and all 3 companies said, you can't afford it, or you can't afford us, or it's too small. So in many levels, we couldn't go back to places in the United States. We talked to various people in Brooklyn who'd done some projects for sauna and so forth, but they just didn't have, the capability to kind of pull it together to make the big integrated glass units and so forth. And our consultants, Front, who also emerged from a 7-person office when we started with them to like 40 or 50, during this kind of robust period, they had already been making inroads into China, who, of course, have, the labor force, the technology, the machines. So how we got hooked up with this particular company in China was really based on their intelligence. In the case of, Dante, we were just talking about it, but maybe you want to talk about that story.
Yeah, in the case of PC,
The metal panel
the
company in
steel
Buenos Aires.
panels, there was basically one company in the country that could do it, and at the end of the day, PC came in at half the price. So it was really just a challenge of, they say that in our business a lot, that it buys a lot of aspirin, right? So we took a leap of faith, and again, the intelligence was brought by Front. They had worked with them before and brought them to the table, and again, at the beginning of the project, schedule, quality-wise, it was really scary, and at the end of the project, wound up being one of the best successes of the project.
So obviously money was a big factor, and the one thing I can say relative to that is this is an expensive building as, finished, but it would be so expensive otherwise if we had gone through and accepted, these other channels, that the project would be unable to pencil out at any level. So the project could only live by all of these people coming forward and say they wanted to, be involved in the project. In that sense, the project had a little bit of a life of its own. Its novelty was attractive to everyone, not only in terms of pride, but in terms of how far they would push, the technology. It's definitely, if not once in a lifetime, it's a very unique project, and for everybody built in New York and tries to push back on limits, that, you get hit very quickly with budgetary issues. So it's a global project.
Well, can we take about 2 more questions? Yes, over here. Just get the microphone, Bill, please.
Thank you. So would you say that your building aesthetic and the combination of the steel beams, the glass, and the metal, would you say that that helps represent the more style of modernism? And that we may see further designs similar to buildings like that, or buildings similar to Mies in the future, I guess?
I understand your question and trying to put both parts of the talk together in a way. Definitely predicting, things is not, architects aren't, thinking in the now, of course, is what we do. Issues of style and issues of appreciation of style and so forth. I think you can only think about possibilities, but also the way in which economies dictate things. Cultural shifts and forces dictate things, much more than just what, the obsession of the architect, has. We bring these imaginary ideas to things, but they're of course tempered and conditioned by, what's going on and what other architects are doing. We live and work in major epicenter cities. We look at what our colleagues are doing. We look at it as a kind of collective form of research. Maybe the question comes out of a little of what's the global agenda of architecture right now, and it might be a little bit, unclear. Some of the problematics stem from some journalistic ideas of architects and architecture being a little bit too capricious and privileging aesthetics and form. Meanwhile, we've got a problematic of a lot of more sober issues. I'm not in favor of that kind of division. So I like your question because it's about appreciating and understanding how beauty could perpetuate in the future, and that shouldn't be expended at the at the expense of other issues which are really deeply important problems. My question is, I don't know. I don't know if Mies is going to make a big return so much as Mies has always been there. It's a powerful kind of medium. And I think deep down, almost everybody who practices architecture is a modernist at some level, even if not in a canonical, I do it this way, kind of rule book way. But if you deal in levitation, if you deal in columns that, don't want to be there, etc., those are ambitions of a modern project. So.
Let's take one more question. Yes, please.
I recall going through your book, Gyroscopic Horizons, and for quite some time, you didn't really have major built works in the United States. Was that just because you weren't, aggressively pursuing them, or was it just so hard to get commissions in the United States?
I guess a factor of all of those. I appreciate your question because I thought that you were going to say something which was going to make my blood boil, but it didn't. And I thought you were going to say because you didn't want to build anything. Thank you for recognizing that, obsessions are, moving towards something, and it takes a while, to get there. I wouldn't say that I wasn't ready to build something, but the law of attraction in terms of who would, work with me and allow my experiment, not to privatize it or turn it into an artistic enterprise, but, I went to school like you. I had lofty ideals, just went home and drew and did things, and never created I want an office of this size, or I'm going to do this by this age. It was always about ideas. So I think the ideas were there, and I had to get old enough for somebody to trust me. I didn't build anything till I was 40, and you know, kind of a classic pathway at one level that a lot of architects, you know, have. So it was hard. I didn't know how to make a practice. I didn't know how to go tell somebody I'm, you know, the one who should do your project. I was just so busy making, you know, my work. And it's still the way I wish we work, you know, today. So we're just getting more chances to be able to do things, and even still to have these interesting conversations with clients. It's not a carte blanche world, you know, which I appreciate. But you know, it just takes time and super persistent effort. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been great.
Let's retire downstairs to the reception and continue the conversation.
Thanks for
Thank you.
that was fun.
Thank you very much.
That was a pleasure for me to be here with Joe and to see you, and especially jet lagged and coming back and all that. She's great. I haven't visited her in Barcelona yet. I have not. Have you? I've seen pictures.
Running around teaching.